Welcome to Canadian Money Matters, a personal finance podcast. I'm Cameron.
And I'm Jenny.
We are two average Canadians discussing the economy, finances, investing, and of course, financial news. But not today. Today we have a special podcast for you. This is going to provide value to anyone interested in taking control of their personal finances, especially if you recognize that your money is somehow always tied to your emotions.
Cameron, have you ever had sleepless nights where you were worried about money?
Yes.
Or times where you didn't want to look at your bank account because you were scared of what you might see?
Often.
Or what you may not see?
Yeah.
If you don't keep track of what you spend every month because the thought of how much you spend gives you anxiety, or if, like many of us, you were never given the tools or education as a child to change your feelings of fear and stress surrounding money and finances to the point that you avoid talking about money with others or your significant other, then we have got the podcast guest for you.
We are excited to introduce the author of the book, The Common Sense Guidebook to Mastering Your Money, Critical Skills You Should Have Been Taught as a Kid but Never Were. Welcome to our podcast, Robin Vinci.
Well, thank you, Cameron and Jenny, for having me. And the book that I wrote was after many coaching sessions where my adult clients would say to me, why don't I know that? I was never taught that. Or I went through my high school years and my college years, and I never picked up any of those skills. I don't know about my checking account. I don't know about credit scores. Why didn't I know this stuff? And, so I would start after hours coaching to help them, because a lot of people started making a lot of money, but they weren't seeing any progress in their financial picture. That's how that came about. People asking me to say, well, why don't I know this? It was a great big question. So I wrote a book that said, yeah, you don't know this. We weren't taught. So it's pretty common not to know some of the basic skills when you get out of school still and go into adulthood. It's very common.
It's fascinating. We talk about this all the time. I feel like our parents, both mine and Jenny's, set a good example with finance, but they never really communicated what they were doing. So even though when I can look back, my father was frugal, my father budgeted, I didn't know what he was doing at the time. And once I left the house and didn't have him there to help, I personally had no idea what I was doing. So is that kind of your intended?
Yes, in fact. Yes, in fact,
Cameron.
Exactly. When I was writing the book, they did sort of a commentary on what kind of audience this kind of information has. And it's up in the several millions of people who really want this information. So it's not like there's not an audience for it. But if you think about the history of money and you think about that big dividing moment when there was the 1929 stock market crash, and then we went into the Great Depression, and how after World War II, we started to pick back up. People didn't speak to money. It was a mystery. People left money in that mysterious category, like it's not attached to the way you live the rest of your life. So through the years since World War II and the Industrial Revolution, we have put sort of a mystery around money, and we've sort of made it a goal to be a millionaire without any steps to get to being a millionaire. Oh, I just want to be a millionaire. Okay, but do you know about how ATMs work and how to tell the bank is charging you too much money or any of those things? And nobody, and for the most part, unless your parents sat down with you and showed you, and then you made an effort to go find out, people just don't know those basic skills. And those basic skills get you a long way to understanding your finances. So that is where that comes from. I think we just made money mysterious.
As you're saying that, what came to me, Robin, was this idea maybe of some type of intergenerational trauma related to money, because the thing that you're saying about money kind of being a mystery or something that people don't talk about, that often, is attached sometimes to trauma. Maybe not as we would necessarily see the effects of trauma. We might see the effects of trauma in other ways. But have you ever thought about that yourself?
Yes. Yes. In fact, my childhood itself was trauma, and my knowledge of money and how it worked came at a very early age, and it was scary. And I will tell you, knowing what I knew when I was very young really did cause me sleepless nights. But when I got older and was found to be in the same position in my 30s, I actually could troubleshoot it because I had experienced it earlier. But trauma with money and trauma in your life and trauma that surrounds your world, it always includes money. Divorce, death, all those different things that have a money connection. It causes people to really fall apart. I mean, that they talk about it all the time. Just give people ammunition with money, and you'll see a loved family fall apart. You'll see a community fall apart. You'll see a corporation take a dive. It's all related to money and the trauma around money. And in fact, when people are doing well, they tend to look less at their money than people who are in trauma with it. Believe it or not, when people really have a lot of money, they actually let go of their connection to their money and hand it off to people without knowing how it works. So, I'm an advocate for hanging in there and connecting to your money at all times. And I think when we disconnect, either through trauma or excess or lack of education about it, when we disconnect, that's where all the problems start.
And chapter 1 just really right away caught me. And it took me back to when I was a child. And even some of those probing questions that you have throughout the book, it brought everything back to me. I even was like thinking about some of the answers to these questions, and I felt anxiety, things that I'd never thought about before or considered, things I thought were in the past. It just brought a lot of emotion back for me. And one of the things I said to Cameron as we were reading your book is, if you have any other problems or things that are bothering you in your life, you'll go to a psychologist or a counselor, and they start with your childhood. But if you have problems with your money, I would say most people, when you go and you have problems with your money, they go into problem solving mode about, well, this is what you can do, or let's help you there, or if you're able to pay off this much, then we can help you in these other ways. But they don't actually ask you, what's your relationship with money, or what was it like when you were growing up as a child with finances?
And I so agree. Our relationship with money is one of the relationships that people don't want to talk about, and the triggers around money. Nobody wants to speak to it. And that's where I, was talking to one of my clients who talked about his childhood and his emotional trauma, and how when it comes to his money, he just sets it aside, that it's an area he doesn't want to know about because in his family, it was always so traumatic and people were yelling about it, or people were frightened by it, or people didn't have enough of it. And his family went through, the competition with neighbors, and, oh, we don't have as much, and you don't get to know what your father makes, and we're not going to talk to you about that. And all these triggers he had regarding the discussion around money, not even money, but the actual discussion of it. And our trigger that makes us go, oh, I'll put that aside. I'll look at that another time. Where we might tackle like everything else in our life, but money sits on a shelf over there and we go, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And that's where that, EQ, IQ, and FQ came from, was developed, was that theory that unless you have all three of those two things together to get to FQ, which is financial stability, if you don't address the other two, your intellectual response to money and your emotional response to money, you're never going to have the ability to actually handle money. So you have to have your emotional response to money in order, and then your intellectual response to money. Like, well, how do I think about money and how do I feel about it? When they're really far apart, like you have this emotional thing over here and your intellectual thing way over here, you can't get financially stable because you can't bridge that huge gap without work and education and, moving the ball together to the middle. That's where you have the most stability, when you can get those things closer together.
I love that conversation, Jenny and Robin, because, it does. I love the point, Jenny, you made is that if you have like an emotional trauma, you go to a therapist, and that's becoming over the years more and more adopted. It's more normalized. People will go to a therapist. Like we understand that now, but it's still not normalized for people with money problems to go to, say, a money therapist, or go to their bank or grab a financial advisor. Typically what people do is they procrastinate, or they put it in a box. This is my opinion, what I've seen anyway. You put it in a box, you don't talk about it, and you put it off until you absolutely have to talk about it. And so they had some fun data we found from Mint, is that they asked 1,500 people, these are Americans, if they knew how much they spent in the previous month, and 65% of people didn't know what they spent in the previous month. Because if you're having money problems and you have trauma about that, you don't want to address it, right? And Gen Zers, they're saying, is even less, right? And in an age where it's so easy to track, how much you spend on an app on your phone, or in my case, I actually have moved to a paper notebook, where I'm still old school. It's only real to me if I write it down, what I spend. People are still not doing that because they don't want to know. It brings up emotional trauma from their past history, where you did not talk about money. That's how we grew up. So that brings in your concept, Robin, of EQ plus IQ equals FQ. So you touched on that, but for listeners that are being introduced to this concept for the first time, can you explain that to us?
It came about because I was coaching one of my clients, and he admitted to having an emotional distance from his money. He admitted that even though he understood that if he's making more money, he should be able to put some away, he should be able to get rid of his debt, emotionally he wasn't able to do it. And he said, I think my emotional problems with money and my background are causing me to avoid what I know to be true intellectually. I know I should be doing it, but it stops me. So we know that EQ is actually a class that's taught in colleges. People get their degrees in EQ, and it's an emotional quotient. It's how do you deal with problems? How do you deal with interactions with people? I mean, it goes into a lot of areas, but money is a big, big problem. And so we said, well, what about your emotional response to money? Well, if you have a great emotional response, but intellectually you go, you know what? I don't like math. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go on my bank. I don't want to see what anybody's talking about. You'll still have a problem. So we talked about the fact that emotionally you have to work through those problems. And to your point, Jenny, there should be money therapists who get you past those problems, because it's not like getting past those two problems and then you'll be a millionaire. No, and getting past those two problems will help you look at your bank statement, will help you decide whether you go to the ATM. I mean, it'll help you make much better decisions. And so then we said, well, if we emotionally had a healthy attachment to money, and we intellectually or mentally had a good attachment to money, then we would probably financially have a better picture of money. And it's absolutely true. Emotionally and intellectually, you need to embrace money as part of your everyday life, not something that comes off the shelf when you get paid twice a month or get paid once a month or every week. We tend to put money away until it comes into our account, and then we have a flurry of activity around that money, and then we put it back in the drawer or put it back on the shelf. And this EQ versus and IQ versus FQ is the thing that made me say that if you look at your money daily, like if you take 30 days worth of expenses and you add it all together, mortgage or rent and utilities and insurance and groceries and gasoline and auto, and you divide by 30 and you see what you need every day when you wake up, if it's $205 or $385 or $1,000 every day to make it through the day, you will look at your money in the same way you look at your food and everything else. And that's what I want to bring to the table. I want people to see that money is part of their nourishment daily. Money is part of who they are, and their money should not be somewhere else while the rest of their life is lived every day. It's not healthy. It's not. So that's where the EQ plus IQ equals FQ came from. How can we have a healthy financial picture in our daily life?
I would love to dig in a little bit deeper into this financial intelligence or FQ, because I'm sure our listeners are listening to this and they're wondering, is this something that I need to look at? How would someone know if they need to work on their financial intelligence? What are some signs that they might see, in their daily lives or any kind of like red flags?
Okay, well, we talk about being connected to your money, which means that if you have credit cards, do you know what your interest rates are? Do you know the balance you're carrying over? If you're debiting the minimum payment every month, are you following how much your purchases now made? Those are things you can start to do. Do you go on your bank account and see what bank charges you've been charged? Do you look at your cash picture and know that maybe the bank says I have $1,200, but I just sent out, I know that in the next 3 days, 800's going through. Do you know that you actually have to say, I only have $400? You need to know ahead of time how your money's working for you. And the financial intelligence means that you know where your money goes, how much money is costing you, how your bank views your money, how your credit cards view your money, what your loans are like, what all your balances are. One of the first things you need to do is know what your debt is. My mortgage is $300,000, let's say. My car loan, I still owe $7,000 on my car. I have credit card debt in the amount of $12,000. And you put it there on the paper and you actually look at what you owe versus what comes in, and the money that comes in, how is it working best for you? And people don't do that. They actually sort of give like the bank permission and your loans permission to take money from you without understanding what does that mean? How is your balance going down? Is your balance going up? If my credit card's at 18% and I don't pay it off at the end of the month, then that 18% is going to be added to the balance that left plus new purchases. And all of a sudden that $100 thing that you bought is now $160 or $180. And people aren't analyzing their money. And they're not saying, okay, what are my needs versus what are my wants? And, if you have a family that you're supporting, you need to prioritize with your family what you want to spend. And people just give out a credit card, or they don't tell their children, you know what, kids, this month we cannot go on that trip, or gasoline has gone sky high, or utilities for the winter are expensive. No one discusses what money does. Kids just think, oh, my parents are paying for it. But they don't know their struggle. And so if you're not willing to admit to your struggle as an adult, there's no way your children are ever going to know what it was growing up that they were privileged to. So it doesn't mean you sit your children down and say, we're out on the street next week, but it certainly means that you're honest with your children and you're honest with yourself about how your money is working for you or not working for you.
See, I love that concept, Robin, because it really got me thinking to people that I talked to and spent time with in my life, in that, and it's not an excuse for these people, but it definitely lets me look at their financial situation more clearly, because I have known people with good EQ, with good emotional intelligence. They don't have trauma around money. They're willing to talk about it and check their bank account daily, but they don't quite have maybe IQ. And I've noticed these people, well, the best way for you to possibly improve your financial, your FQ, is you need a better job. You need to make more money. You need to do things to build your income and build your own kind of worth so you can make more, because your EQ is already good. You just need better intelligence around money and making money, and you'll be fine. But then there's the other people that I see that are, their IQ is high. These are, doctors and lawyers and intelligent people, make a lot of money, and it's accountants even sometimes. And the problem is they don't understand why I'm so broke. Where does the money go? And it comes down to that. Well, you can be an absolutely intelligent person, but if you have a poor EQ, if you have that emotional trauma around money, then you're making the same mistakes, or you have the same problems as somebody who makes far less than you but has a higher EQ. That's my interpretation of the EQ plus IQ, and I absolutely loved it in my use cases. But I have to ask, you've touched on a couple things as far as like communication and checking your bank account. And I cheated. We've read your book, obviously, and I feel like this is touching on your inner bookkeeper. So is that one way to start helping, improving, fixing, building up your EQ, is your inner bookkeeper? And what other tips are there in your book, at least one or two, that can help people that have poor EQs right now?
That is so much fun that you asked me. I used to always say to people who said, I don't like math, or money isn't my good thing, or numbers confuse me, I would always say to them, you have an inner bookkeeper in there, because everybody, when they want something, Cameron, they'll go, oh, I can scrape up the money to do that. I want to go camping. And they'll somehow put themselves together. They'll put their finances together to be able to do that one thing. And they can, get the car packed, and they can get the money together, and they can put the deposit down, and they can find a way to do that because they're energized by it being something they really want to do. And money, keeping track of money, has always been something most people really don't want to do. And you're right, some of the most highly educated people are not always the people with that financial intelligence, because they've either not learned it and they've been studying another, like to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, and they've been studying so hard that went by the wayside, and then they count on someone else to do it. And so some of the most important tips are, never give away the work you need to do on your money until you understand it completely. And never, ever make knee-jerk decisions about money. Always give yourself a moment to process it. That will help your emotional intelligence around money. The EQ one is an entire program of how to understand your emotional intelligence. I say that in the book. I give the EQ people their credit. But if you expand that out, you have to stop yourself at all those things that would prevent you from understanding what you're doing. Even getting your credit card off a website that's automatic, making you stand up and go get a credit card and enter it in physically and say, do I really want this? Do I really need this? Is this good for my family? Is this, I think you'll see in the book on Inner Bookkeeper, I do something about discretionary funds. And discretionary funds, it's, I think, one of the most important chapters in the book, understanding what it means to have discretionary funds to buy what you want versus real funds to get what your family and you need. And there's a big difference. So first determining, is this something I want or is this something I need? That's a big thing. If I want this, can I pay for it without it having any impact on anybody's life, including my own? And so that inner bookkeeper that I love to talk about is that thing in your gut that says to you, I shouldn't be buying this. I shouldn't be doing this. Or delaying it and saying, oh, I'll pay for it next month when the credit card comes in. And if you've done that enough times, then you can't do any of it. So that emotional response is the first thing we want to start dealing with. We want to have that ability to let that inner bookkeeper talk to you. It's the gut feeling I'm talking about. We could call it gut bookkeeping. You really do know you can't afford it. You really do know that it's not something you need. And then you have to say, okay, I'll deal with this, because I'll tell you what I hear all the time from clients and friends. They said, oh, I can't afford it, but I deserve it. I take a big gasp and I say, oh, honey, you deserve way more than that. People, of course, deserve all these wonderful things. Someone who is working really hard and is successful at raising their family, even if it's on a very low income, you're a success. You're a success if you're doing all that, waking up every morning with a healthy family and trying to make ends meet. The struggle means you're a success if you know. You know, people always think that you have to have $1 million to be successful. But if you have $1 million free and clear, maybe. But if you have $1 million and $950,000 worth of debt, are you really a millionaire? I don't know. I have my own opinion on that. But this inner bookkeeper is your gut reaction. Do I need that? Does my family need that? Will it enhance our future, or is it just going to add debt? And that inner bookkeeper could cause you to process, and at the end of the process say, you know what, we're not going to do that. It's okay to have a wish list. It's okay to want things. It's okay to think you deserve stuff. But if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And it is a mistake not to trust your gut. And that's the inner bookkeeper.
I love how you tie everything financially related to emotion and like an emotional response. So I do that myself, but since reading your book, I find I do it more, where in that I was talking with Jenny, I believe through your book, I think we made it through probably the first 20 pages before you started really talking about money. And it was really establishing the why, why this is important to you, why there's passion, why you should care about your finances, why you should read this book and learn about finances. I really love that emotional attachment and going with your gut, with your inner bookkeeper, because I think that's what a lot of people are trying to avoid, even though they know. Like we do that, we started connecting that here because me and Jenny, like I'm speaking on a brand new microphone right now. And when I bought it, it was like, but I need it. This is part of my channel and I need good audio. And Jenny was very much, that's a want. And I know it's a want. But emotionally, I can convince myself that it's a need. And that's something that needs to be kind of addressed personally, where people can go on a trip because they feel bad that they're not going on a trip, but they can't afford it. And a lot of our financial decisions are tied emotionally, but we seem to try to separate that. And you tackle it headfirst in your book, where finances and money aren't seem to be two separate things. They seem to be much more like this than I think a lot of people are willing to recognize. Is that my interpretation of your words as an author? Is that fairly accurate, or?
That's extremely accurate. And, I'll give an example really quickly so people can relate. Marriages and wedding ceremonies and everything in this world have become quite extravagant. And I have known people that truly cannot go to a destination wedding or to a bachelorette or bachelor party that's out of town or out of state or out of the country. And yet they'll scrape stuff together at their own peril to try and attend, instead of saying, you know what, I would love to go. I'll take you to dinner myself, but I can't afford to do that. And instead they go, and then on the plane trip home or the bus trip home or the train home, they are literally sick to their stomachs because they know they just dropped a whole lot of money on something they couldn't afford. And I've talked about that in the past. It's okay to say, I don't have the funds for that. Yet, because of our emotional response, we want to be one of the people that stands in there and throws the money down and says, no, I can do it, when you can't. And we've created an atmosphere in our country, and probably in Canada too, and in the world at large, that if you can't afford those things, there's something wrong with you, or you've failed. And that's not true. When you can stand tall and say, that is something that's not in my budget, you are a success. Going and spending money you don't have is where the problem is. Not standing up and saying, I'm a little embarrassed that I'm in the position to have to say no, but in all good conscience, my inner bookkeeper is saying, you don't have the money to do that, right? And nobody thinks that's okay to do. And I will tell you, I think that's okay to do. And I support the average citizen who is living paycheck to paycheck or just above that, or is really struggling, to be able to be proud to say, in this particular circumstance, I can't do this. And so, a family member of mine had to say no to someone, and they actually ridiculed her, and she stood tall and she said, you know what, be mad at me if you want. But the last time I was in a wedding, my mom financed it, and my mom says that she can't afford to finance this bachelorette party. So I can't, because she was in her graduate program and working. She said, I can't. And they were mad. But she stood tall and said, I just can't say I can do that.
Wow.
So
good for
if you
her.
can say no, if you can say no, you're a success. So I encourage any audience that will listen, and Cameron and Jenny, your audience, it is not wrong to say that is not in my budget. I can't pull that off.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. I mean, there's so many stories. Even hearing stories from friends who are going on trips, they can't afford it, but they feel pressured in some way. And it might be someone's, 20th birthday or 40th anniversary, and it only comes once, and they feel that pressure to go. So you've heard it here. I mean, Robin is saying it's okay to say no.
And it's actually healthy. It's a healthy thing to analyze your finances and stop, the free fall, or put a halt on something that's not in your budget. And it's actually successful and healthy to do that. So I'd love to change that mentality. And with your help, maybe we can get a few people on board with that. But to change the mentality that I'm a failure if I say no and I can't afford it. You are not.
That's right. I think this is a really good segue into another question we had. And I think what you've already given us one example of a critical skill that people should have been taught about finances when they were younger, but they never were, which is having good, I guess I would call what you just described, like healthy boundaries around finances and saying no if you can't afford something. What are some other examples of critical skills that people should have been taught, whether it was from their parents or within school about finances, but they weren't?
Okay. This is really a wonderful question, because I am trying to get involved with the academic world, and I presented an outline for what I think young people, particularly, teenagers, need to know before they leave home and go off to college. And when I presented the information, the academic world said to me, well, this is really granular. And I was complimented by that. And they felt that it was sort of not what the academic world would be interested in, that they wanted to do more high finance. And they call their classes finance. And I call the classes money management, bookkeeping, mastering the basic skills. So what you're saying is something that even the academic world moves away from, and that's budgeting, the simple needs of the ins and the outs of your cash flow, what it means about a bank versus what you really have. Um, uh, what does it mean that your credit score, what is your credit score, and how does that influence everything you do in the future? And I will tell you, a critical skill is understanding that once you have, in this country, in the United States, a social security number, everything you do in your life, it hits that social security number. So if you go off and get a department store credit card and don't pay it, and you're 21 and in college and you don't pay it, and you go to get a car when you're 25 and you haven't paid that, you've got a ding on your credit report that will tell you you're going to get either a higher interest rate, or we're not going to give you a car, or we're not going to rent to you. So number one is in children that are now teens are old enough to understand what a credit report is. That is critical to understanding how that's going to impact you from your time you're 16 and working, as soon as you get a job, to after you get out of college and maybe get your career going, or you move back home and your parents say to you, oh, well, go get your own car, or you know what, you need to move out and get your own apartment. And then someone says to you, well, your credit score stinks. And you go, credit score? I haven't even done anything yet. Oh, please, we need juniors in high school to understand credit scores and understand how their relationship with money impacts them on paper and impacts them the entire time they're living. Kids get out of college, you're given three in the credit score system. And by the way, the credit score system is really a little bit skewed. I'm not happy with the way the credit report works, and we can talk about that another time. But you're given 300 points just for being born, okay? And then, how much credit is afforded you. And, if you're maxed out on your credit cards, you won't have a good credit score. It's all about this gap between, what credit you've been given and how much you owe. And it's kind of complicated. But if you're a young person and you've thought, threw caution to the wind and didn't pay things, or, wrecked someone's apartment that you lived in, or skipped out on your rent, or didn't pay your car payments, and then all of a sudden you're 25 and you want to put on your grown-up pants and you've got a lousy 530 credit score, when to get really good stuff it needs to be over 800, and you didn't know about it at all or didn't understand how it works, and you've already wrecked your young adult life.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you didn't even know.
It takes years to undo that kind of damage. Years. It
only takes 1 month to ruin it, and it takes 60 months to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings me back to being 17 years old, going away to university. I had to get a student loan because I came from like a working class family. I was the first person to go to university. I told Cameron this too. I went and got a loan, and it's astonishing. They'll just give a loan to anyone pretty much. And I was asked, a few questions like, oh, do you want a variable rate or a fixed rate? I didn't know what that was. And, fast forward, I had $40,000 in debt at the end of my 4-year university education. And I look back on it now and I'm like, who would give $40,000 to a 17-year-old kid? A lot of people I went to school with, they just blew that money in the first year. A lot of them dropped out of university. It's just crazy to me that we don't teach kids more about these things.
I so agree. I had an acquaintance of an acquaintance get her a student loan and buy a Louis Vuitton bag for $700. And I said, that actually isn't what a student loan is for. Hello. And it's true. There should be absolutely classes in high school to explain student loans. There are so many ways that you can use a student loan, and it can augment other money. It can come, your parents can take out a student loan. I know a lot of people whose parents refinance their home to partially finance their child's university experience. Me, I just basically, until one of my children's master program, I just worked and worked and worked and paid their tuition, and I didn't go anywhere or do anything in order for them not to have loans when they got out of school. But, most people, a lot of people can't do that. And I will say that a class, in fact, a series of classes on money literacy for teenagers is what's in order. I've actually created one, and I'm trying to get traction to get it in. And it discusses taking out loans and using credit cards and getting yourself into a lot of debt and coming out of college with a lot of debt. And for 40,000 is a lot of debt to have when you're first getting out of school. And, the education is invaluable, but 40,000 for a new young person, that's a lot of money. And the ramifications of not paying it or deferring it. A lot of young people get the deferment and realize, and I'll tell you, if you've deferred your student loan without sanctioned deferments like we had during the pandemic, a lot of times that will be the reason that they say, no, we won't refinance it. You deferred it. I mean, there's so many intricacies about getting a student loan. There should be classes for people that are going off to college who will have to take loans, and how to spend that money and what that money is for. It is not for you to go to Cabo San Lucas for the weekend with your friends. That money is not for that. And I think we're not specific enough with how we spend what we have. And that's a wonderful point, Jenny. How will you know at 17 when someone hands you money for school what the long-term effects of that loan are, unless someone tells you?
I think it's fascinating. It actually ties into our previous two podcasts. So our last two podcasts were basically frugal car shopping and frugal home shopping. Very summarized, but that's what the topic was. And when we produced the podcast, we're like, well, we might not get as many listeners because you're only kind of going to listen to it if you want to buy a car or if you're in the market to buy a house. But really, everybody should have listened to it, because the number one tip in both cases was build your credit score. And you should actually build your credit score starting 10 years before you think about buying a house, 5 years before you think about buying a car, because there's all these money saving tips online that are usually quite terrible, in my opinion. But one of the best things you could do to save money and live below a decent budget is to have a good credit score, because you get the car loan for cheaper, you get the house loan for cheaper. And these are your major expenses. And that's not talked about, because they'll give Jenny a $40,000 student loan that she can't afford to really pay back. And before you know it, she can't pay back other things because of her $40,000 student loan. And your credit score is shot. And then there's almost no point listening to our How to Buy a Car Cheaply podcast, because your credit score is already shot and your interest rate's going to be terrible.
Absolutely. And if we knew in advance the impact of all these decisions, we hopefully would make different ones. I mean, I think the best thing about finding your inner bookkeeper and actually, exploring how to make your credit score good from the beginning, when you know about it, understanding credit reports, understanding credit card debt, understanding that maybe you don't want to buy a car, maybe you want to lease it, or the opposite, and that home ownership is really something that should be down the line after you understand everything else you're doing. Because people buy a house and they go, oh, that's the dream, to own a home. But really the bank owns it, and they have to fix the water heater and the roof, and they're not capitalized enough to own a home. And that's another thing. We just say, oh, go out and own a home. Okay, but do you have the resources to fix that home when something goes wrong? And if you have to go into more debt, or you have to do something else to get things fixed at your home, maybe you weren't quite ready. And people always say, oh, you're throwing away rent. Well, that could be a topic on another day. I could go into that for hours and hours, but I don't believe that to be true. And if you're a renter, you are still a successful human being. So there's nothing wrong with renting. I rent. I've owned homes. Honestly, I rent now. I'm older. I don't want that responsibility. But let's talk about what you need to know before you leave home. Let's talk about if you were in a marriage where you handled all the finances and the other person didn't, what happens to that other person when there's not someone running their finances for them? They don't know. Let's talk about someone who got laid off and what do you do with your finances when you don't have a job? Those are all things that are so emotionally charged that people don't want to speak about. And I'm saying, bring it on, honey. Let me be as granular as I can with this, because there's a big gap between being born and higher education on the boots on the ground stuff that helps you to succeed.
I would like to ask maybe the what's next for Robin, and if she is planning on writing any more books, or if she's working on any other projects that relate to this book. I think that would be great.
Okay, well, Jenny, thank you. What I wrote the book, and I do have another book in me, and my producer Joe, he sweated buckets over the first book. He was really instrumental in getting it off the ground. But I am passionate about a teen money literacy program that I would like to make available to high schools and community colleges and colleges. I'm willing to teach it. I'm willing to do it. I've written it on what I consider to be the 10 parts that are most critical for someone between the ages of 15 and 25 to know. And so that's my next passion project. And the book will probably come from that, specifically aimed at young people before they make all those mistakes. At least the information would be out there, and they'd be able to go, oh, I heard about this, and get like a thunk, like an imaginary thunk on their head that says, hey, wait a minute, I learned that. What pitfall is there, or what hole am I jumping into? Let me step back, avoid the hole, and, go look and see if I'm really going the right direction. That would be the next thing I'm trying to do. I want to get that money literacy out there in like a format that people can really relate to, in an outline form with action steps and workshops and things that say, okay, bring your bank statement in, let's balance it. I'll show you how. Let's, bring in let's all run a credit report. Let's see where we're at. Let's read it.
Wow.
Let's understand it. Yeah.
Where can I sign up?
I know. Jenny, you're signed up right now.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. I feel like, I've taken a few of these like online courses before, just on some of those basics, but I feel like you can never have enough. It's always good to have a refresher.
Always. Because when we get into our daily life, we get into the minutia of our daily life and the survival of daily life. And by the end of the day, we're too exhausted to give money like it's, 15 minutes of fame every day. But we need to. You actually, before you go to bed or when you wake up in the morning, get up early, go check out your accounts, go look at things, go connect. So before you start your day, or at the end of the day, after you review your day, go look and connect with your money and say, okay, I'm not paid for 3 more days, but tomorrow, I don't have money to spend tomorrow. So let's wake up, let's make our meals, let's get through the day. Everybody have a successful business day or school day, and then connect again with your money and get some peace. The more we disconnect, the more anxiety we have. I can guarantee you, at least after you read the book, you have some steps to get some peace of mind, right, guys? A few steps to take, right? That's what I'm hoping for. Peace of mind, and then active steps, boots on the ground, learn the basics, and go out in the world with a smile, go out into the world with a big smile on your face saying, hey, I've got some skills.
That's right. That's right. And before we wrap up, just to mention again, Robin's book is The Common Sense Guide to Mastering Your Money, Critical Skills You Should Have Been Taught as a Kid But Never Were. It is on Amazon and it's very affordable, which is another thing that I love about your book, Robin.
Well, I think this conversation has been a journey, a fantastic journey. Thank you so much, Robin. I mean, I have to say to our listeners, we have gone from essentially starting with the emotional side of money and talking about our emotions and communications, all the way down to the technical aspects of money and your credit score and how important that is, and seemingly everything in between, from budgeting and how important that is to holding yourself true to your budget and being proud at sticking to your budget by even saying to somebody, no, I can't afford that. I've learned so much just in this conversation, and I'm sure this is just the start. This is just the start of your book, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, again, for people, that is the Common Sense Guidebook to Mastering Your Money, Critical Skills You Should Never Have Been Taught as a Kid But Never Were. That's on Amazon. The other thing for our listeners is Robin Da Vinci has a very unique name. That's Robin Da Vinci, that is spelled Robin space DA space VINCI. So all you need to do is put that into YouTube. Robin has her own YouTube channel, as well as her own website, robindavinci.com, as well as you could plug her name into Amazon and her book will pop up. So she has multiple ways to get in contact with her, as well as down in the show notes, we will link to Robin as well. Or if this is making it all the way to my YouTube channel, it will be a pinned comment. So again, that's how you could find Robin. And one last time, thank you so much for your time, Robin. We really appreciate it.
You know what? You're welcome, and thank you for having me. This is really wonderful. I feel very heard, and I appreciate all your interest and your really thoughtful comments. Thank you so much. You guys are helping people, and that's what I'm about as well.
Thank
you.